Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 8th of April 2020, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish, and we're delighted to have Alex Thomson bringing us, of course, Eastern approaches from the Netherlands. And, well, we're very sorry to have to say today that we've got to begin with the sad news that Ian Crane is seriously ill in hospital. He's got a very serious cancer condition. He's very dependent on close support, not only from the NHS teams, but also from his family, of course, and members of his Alternative View conference team. What he has been able to say to me is that he's been receiving very good care from those NHS staff, despite obviously restrictions with the COVID-19 saga. He wants to thank everyone who's worked to help him in his personal battle over recent months, and very much wishes that his efforts with the Alternative View conferences should continue. Now, I've got to say to you that Ian is seriously ill, and although a few people are able to speak to him, he's not in a condition to deal with a lot of correspondence or cards or any of those things. So we're going to say that his personal wishes need to be respected. But what we do have to say is that this, of course, has meant that there has to be changes to the Alternative View number 11 due coming up in early May, 1st to the 4th of May this year. And we're going to say straight away to people, please be patient. Please do not bombard the AV team with calls and emails for updates, as further information will be available in the next few days. And just do remember that a very small team that put those events on is also having to cope with the fact that Ian is very, very poorly indeed. We know that AV11 can't go ahead due to restrictions with the hotel venue. That's as a result of the COVID-19 restrictions. But the AV team are looking at what can be done. We think there are some exciting ideas, and we think that the proposals will appeal to people who've already paid and bought their tickets. So please bear with us for another few days, and then there'll be a full announcement and you'll be able to see what is on offer for AV. But of course, everyone is determined that AV will continue. That is what Ian would certainly have wished.
Yes, indeed. Okay, let's move on then to this, and of course the daily statistics on COVID-19. 1.4 million global cases so far, according to the statistics. 83,103 deaths, and so far 309,108 people have made full recoveries. So that leaves 1,052,605 active cases, just over 1 million mild cases, and 47,865 cases. Now, yesterday, the latest Office for National Statistics results came out, a report came out, Brian, and the first thing we've got to say is that it looks like there's pressure being placed on them to try to improve the ability for a narrative to be built. So let's just have a look at this. First of all, this is the total weekly deaths in England and Wales. The red line there, the 2020 line, and the orange line is the average of the past 5 years. And you can see that those have now crossed, and that in week 12 there were some more deaths than above the average, but still well below the peak in week 2. And in fact, as we've shown you in previous programs, still well below, I mean, very well below the types of excess mortality that we've seen in 2017 and 2016 as a result of influenza. So let's have a look at what the Office for National Statistics has done. This is the deaths in England and Wales broken down by age. And you can see on the left hand there the number of deaths for those under 1 year old, from 1 to 14, from 15 to 44, from 45 to 64, from 65 to 74, and so on up to 85 plus. And you can see that that obviously once you get above 65, the numbers of people dying increases obviously compared to younger ages. but you can see that 27th of the week up to 27th of March 2020, there were 4,444 people, I think, if I'm reading that correctly, people over the age of 85 who died, by comparison with nearly 6,000 in week 2. So the question still remains, is the response proportionate to the response from government for the lockdown and for the economic damage that's being done? Is this proportionate? Now, this is where it gets interesting. There was an extra tab appeared on the Office for National Statistics spreadsheet yesterday, and it was all about included information about COVID-19, but particularly about the actual date of death by registrations on a particular date. Now, this is the issue with the ONS statistics. They are recording deaths that are registered. So in other words, the person has to have died. There has to be a death certificate issued, and that death certificate has to be registered before it appears on the Office for National Statistics data. And so what they've shown here in the left-hand column is the ONS deaths by actual date of death. That's for people that were registered by the 27th of March. And in the right-hand column, those that were registered by the 1st of April. So what they're attempting to do is to bring statistics that would normally have been in next week's release forward into this week's release to give people an impression of how the numbers are changing over time. And I suppose that's a reasonable thing to do. But what was going on, Brian, last night on Channel 4 News, for example, was that they were expressing extreme shock that number for example, the 27th of March went from 647 up to 1,639 based on only a few days later data. And they extrapolated that to suggest that that was going to mean that ultimately we're going to end up with a much larger death rate at the end of the day. This seems to me to be somewhat misleading. But it's clear from this that the Office for National Statistics has felt that they needed to try to bring some data forward from the next release into this one to try to make the picture seem better for those who are promoting the lockdown and think that this is the best way forward.
Would it be right to say, Mike, that you pick up that the Office for National Statistics has been put under pressure to modify the way that they're producing their data?
Well, that would be speculative, but yes, I mean, it has to be. It is interesting that they have pushed this information in, and it's interesting how the mainstream media then sort of ran with that information yesterday. Yes, so, we've still got to be very careful about how this data is being presented. And, once again, we're not saying that nothing should have been done about people that are dying. Of course, this is, for some people, this is a terrible thing. So it's got to be dealt with. But, the complete shutdown, as we're going to come on to a little later, is having massive implications.
Yeah. Well, let's just have a look at this one, because this is another set of statistics that needs very careful, data rather than statistics that needs very careful consideration. It's a Public Health England document. This was sent through to us last night. List of reportable diseases to be notified to Public Health England health protection teams by prison and other detention centre healthcare teams. And on the right of your screen, you've got a list of reportable diseases to be notified. And under single infections, which is in the second paragraph, can I ring it? I hope so. Let's see, there it is. You've got COVID-19. But the trouble is that this document was originally produced in 2015. That's just popped up on your screen, the second page of the document, which says it was published in March 2015, yet it refers to COVID-19. And of course, what we know from this, and doing some research ourselves this morning, was that Public Health England has been updated online, but there's nothing on the updated digital document to say that. So we're now entering a really interesting period where the government can change data that appears on the website literally at the press of a button, and you have no idea what you're really looking at. Are you looking at historical data where we might say, well, it's very funny, it's got COVID-19. That was a name only created, I think, on the 10th of February this year. So we're in the era where documents and data can be changed at the press of the button by the government, and this is really starting to deceive the public, and also it must make it very difficult for the organisations themselves. You have a document in front of you, but you're not sure when was this last updated, what was the baseline for it. So we're just pointing a finger at that one and saying you've got to be very careful with the data and statistics the British government is pushing out, because they're changing those documents to suit their own agenda, presumably on an hour-by-hour basis.
Okay, so let's move on to this. Coronavirus patients have now been admitted to the new NHS Nightingale Hospital for the first time. Now, of course, everybody will know by now that this is a 4,000-bed hospital. It's been built in a conference centre in 9 days. Everybody's very proud of that, and 16,000 staff required to keep it running. They tweeted this out yesterday. This evening, the Royal Air Force and the London Ambulance practiced a patient transfer. Speed and efficiency come naturally to our emergency responders. Now, of course, everybody that goes into this facility is going to be already on a respirator. And so it seems that military are going to be used to help transport people. Now, they are refusing to say at this point how many people are in there already. So the report saying that a spokeswoman has declined to say exactly how many coronavirus patients have been admitted so far, but stressed there's also treatment capacity available in other hospitals across London. Well, a similar facility is going to be set up in Exeter for the southwest. So Exeter's West Point Arena to be temporary coronavirus emergency hospital, according to Devon Live, and this is going to be 400 beds, I think. But the problem is, Brian, that the reports that we're getting from consultants round about the UK are saying that really they're getting very little very few new
patients into those facilities.
Absolutely. So one hospital, 3 new patients yesterday, 1 with a heart condition, 1 with a stroke, and I think so they're not seeing the huge numbers of people that need these facilities so far. So I'd be very interested to know how many people are actually in the Nightingale Hospital already, and how that changes over time. I'm not certain that those statistics are going to be made available.
I don't think they will, but what we can say is that a number of people now investigating for themselves, and there are a lot of very good little video clips on YouTube, for example, where people are having a look at how busy the hospitals seem to be, and the answer is not very busy at all. But one man, I understand, has been put in prison for daring to
3 months, yes,
for film inside a hospital, given a 3-month sentence. So the government's clearly very frightened if ordinary members of the public start to investigate statistics and data, which we're certainly challenging. Well, where's this heading? Well, it's probably heading for the fact it's going to continue as long as possible, and we're now starting to get the real cues. So let's have a look at this. A Breitbart report, Ezekiel Emmanuel, we cannot return to normal until there's a vaccine, and that could be 12 to 18 months. So this particular gentleman, Dr. Emmanuel, an architect of Obamacare and special advisor to the Director General of the World Health Organization, told MSNBC the last words that the United States cannot return to normal until a Chinese coronavirus vaccine is available, which he speculated could take between 12 and 18 months. And if we just have a look at the detail, he said, realistically, COVID-19 will be here for the next 18 months or more. We will not be able to return to normalcy until we find a vaccine or effective medications. I know it's dreadful news to hear. How are people supposed to find work if this goes on in some form for a year and a half? Is all that economic pain worth trying to stop COVID-19? Question. The truth is we have no choice. If we prematurely end that physical distancing and the other measures keeping it at bay, deaths could skyrocket into the hundreds of thousands, if not a million. We cannot return to normal until there's a vaccine. Conferences, concerts, sporting events, religious services, dinner in a restaurant, none of that will resume until we find a vaccine a treatment or a cure. So I think this man is really telling us what's in the minds of the people who are controlling world political policy at the moment, and that is drag it out, keep people in lockdown until there's a vaccine, and then what is it going to be, Mike? Compulsory vaccination?
I think that's very, very likely. Now let's welcome Alex Thomson to the programme. Alex, the UK Law Weekly here, asking about the lawfulness of the lockdown.
Yes, Mike, if you can put that slide up for us. This is tipped to us by a viewer, and like you and Brian, I always have to say thank you very much for our sharp-eyed viewers pointing us to the best information. Now, this has been written by a gentleman who is actually the senior editor of the UK Law Weekly and who also does the UK Law Weekly podcast. And what he is summing up here, and I think you may also have screenshotted his tweet about this, or rather a tweet about it, is that he's reviewing the fact that there has been some kind of gatekeeping going on in the UK Constitutional Law blog. Now, the UK Constitutional Law blog, as its name suggests, is the one-stop shop for those within the legal world, particularly in the jurisdiction of England and Wales. And what it does is it basically provides, as we can now see, gatekeeping. So the original story that went up there was by Professor King. I'm just looking for his Christian name if I can find it. We're probably not supposed to say Christian name right now, but the name's familiar to me. I can't remember his Christian name. But anyway, Professor King, who sparked all this off, did manage to get to write in the UK Constitutional Law blog, to which this is a kind of analytical response. And he gave the official line, move along, nothing to see here. And as you would expect, it's all human rights, right? Human rights legislation, the ECHR, proportionality, the balance of rights, no problem with the measures brought in last month, both in the Act, in primary legislation, and also in the country-specific regulations and schedules added to them. Now, as a response to that, and people will find that if they go and to a search engine and look for lockdown, a response to Professor King, and the article there is written by Robert Craig, he has to put this on the Human Rights blog, the UK Human Rights blog, and he takes it apart. I think in extra time I may be reading parts of that blog and disseminating it. But anyway, in response to that duo, the UK Constitutional Law blog with Professor King, who is the big one at University College London, who advises the Constitutional Committee of the House of Lords, no less, saying no problem with the lawfulness. And then the response to it by Robert Craig, an equally eminent constitutional lawyer, saying there are serious problems, more about that in extra time. Then we find that the author of this piece in response, I can't quite see the name on the slide there, perhaps you can read that.
No, that's McCleaver.
Yes, that's right. I think his name is actually Cleaver. But anyway, he says what's going on here, because people wanted to provide a response to the original piece by Professor King, who is obviously the establishment voice on constitutionality of these regulations, and was given an extremely odd response. And that tweet that you found, I think, a moment ago, if you can bring that up, is one of the eminent lawyers, not the author of this piece, but yet another fourth lawyer, saying he wished to respond within the pages, the online pages of the UK Constitutional Law Association's blog. And David Allen Green, quite an eminent constitutional lawyer himself, says the UK Constitutional Law Association have refused my offer of a post critical of the coronavirus regulations, even though they have published 2 posts in defence of their constitutional validity. The blog, I am told, is full for this week. This is all very odd, and people can find that tweet and go down the thread. He's got quite a thread of it here. A lot of people having a bit of a laugh with him and saying this is the first time that the internet's been full up. What a convenient excuse. You know, it's the constitutional legal equivalent of sorry, I'm washing my hair tonight, isn't it? But we'll go into that more in extra time. But just to bookmark here for now that people can find those particular pieces, and particularly by following the links in the one that we put on screen, the lawfulness of lockdown, people will find that actually there is a lot of gatekeeping going on, and the appeals, particularly on the side of the governments within its powers here, they're all appeals to post-1998 human rights legislation and our treaty commitments to international law. Nothing about our own legal system and common law.
Yes, and Alex, what about on the continent? What is there much of a pushback against lockdown over there?
Sadly, not very much that I can see, although it's interesting and unsurprising that the smaller, shall we say, Northern European Germanic jurisdictions are starting to release the strictest measures. Sweden, of course, famously didn't have many regulations. Here in the Netherlands, we've had an intelligent lockdown, but now Denmark and Austria, two typical examples of fairly freedom-minded Germanic countries. Yes, they have their own problems and quite tyrannical policing at times, but they are starting to put intelligent measures in place. What was particularly of note, I think, is that a local mayor quite near me put out on social media, there is no need to panic, because she took the particular example of church services. There are good online alternatives. None of you need to meet. And the legal response to that, much like the august constitutional lawyers I just quoted from London, the Dutch constitutional lawyers on social media are saying that they cannot see any problem, because the freedom of assembly, the freedom of worship are just two examples of a bunch of constitutional rights which, as they themselves say, were removed by the stroke of a pen by the executive. And apparently you can't complain about any of that, and you can't certainly go into any detail, drill down and say these are real rights and the rest of them are fictional ones that came up in the mid 20th century. So we've got a bit of a mess on our hands here.
Absolutely.
That's a very polite way of putting it. And I'm going to come back on to what people are actually able to do at the moment. Well, of course, if you can get out of your house to exercise, you can certainly take video footage. And several people pointed me at this particular video clip called 7 Police and 1 Guy. And it's a gentleman out walking, and he seems a very strange incident with a very large number of people clearly not following the social distancing guidelines. They are police, but we have 7 police and 1 guy. So we've got a still from the video on screen. If I just try and blow up the key bit, obviously, although it's night time, we can see this group of people clustered around one individual. Now, we don't know what was going on, but what we're seeing is a massive reaction from the police to a single person for whatever reason, and it appears that all of the COVID-19 restrictions don't apply to the police. But as the video goes on, you can see that actually there are 4 police vehicles involved in this incident. So 3 police patrol cars and also 1 large police van. And we say, what are the police doing? There are other videos about very strange police activity where there's been a large concentration of police cars and helicopters, very aggressive response from the police. But I just personally say that when people have a chance to interact with the police, the politer and more reasonable you are, the better it is, because you get a chance to put your views across and also to give police information they don't necessarily have. They're trained to deal with aggressive people, so if you're aggressive, they love it. Whereas if you're polite and reasonable, it presents them a problem. But we can see close down coming in with the police interpreting the law. It isn't exactly the law itself, but the police are interpreting the law, and it's increasing the potency of the lockdown. Well, what's to come? We also were sent this, and this is a report by Dr. Michael Ryan, the Executive Director for the World Health Organization Health Emergencies Programme. And he says that in most parts of the world, due to lockdown, most of the transmission of the virus that is actually happening in many countries is now happening in the household at family level. In some senses, transmission has been taken off the streets and pushed back into family units. Now we need to go and look in families to find those people who may be sick and, quote, remove them and isolate them in a safe and dignified manner, unquote. Now, I'm just going to label this is madness, I believe, in this man's mind, but of course he believes a lie. And what have we got here? We've got something unbelievably serious being proposed. And very interesting to see that when Fox News reported this, and the reporter was Tucker Carlson, he actually said this at the end of the talk by the World Health Organization man. He said, just so you know, he's paraphrasing it effectively, just so you know, we're coming to your house, seizing your children and, quote, isolating them in a safe and dignified manner, unquote, whatever that means. Now, I think we have to ask a question. Was he genuinely shocked? And if you're kind to him, you say he was genuinely shocked, or was he actually trying to reinforce a message as to what's coming? But where's this lot originating from? Well, you have to go back to the World Health Organization. If you want to see that statement live, then you can go on Mike Ryan's Twitter page here. Number one tweet has got the embedded video so that you can find it very easily. But what is fascinating in the follow-on World Health Organization tweets is that we quickly find that we've got Lady Gaga and global citizens involved in this. So we thought these were rather crass entertainers, but no, these are being helped to push the message out through the global population, because of course what Lady Gaga has to say is important. If you think I'm joking, I'm not, because this is the link through to Global Citizen, and it says, this valiant effort we're all witnessing, this triumph that is the medical community. Lady Gaga stopped by all three major late night talk shows to talk about one world together at home. So they are pushing people into their homes, and if you follow this trail through, it brings you to this, a rather sinister image, I think. Global Citizen, we're excited to announce one world together at home, a global broadcast, and this is supposedly in support of World Health Organization and healthcare workers on the front lines of the COVID-19 crisis. And you can follow it through a bit more to this gentleman, Hugh C. Evans. Now, he started some charities in Australia, but apparently he's one of the nominated global saviors. I'm being sarcastic there. But if you look at the top of that tweet, what they're really after is a quick 675 million to help their little propaganda campaign. So I'm going to say, Alex, when I followed this trail through, it's truly horrific that you've got people calmly saying we need to come into your homes and remove family members. Don't worry, we're going to look after them in a dignified way. And we've got this massive World Health Organization propaganda system running, where they're begging just an extra $675 million. It would be difficult to make this up.
It would be, Brian, but we're at less of a disadvantage if we are switched on to UK Column and like-minded outlets, because you, of course, in one of your early and most viewed news segments back in 2013, showed police acting on the orders of Staffordshire Council, going in to seize a child, acting like robots. And now we have seen the international actors, Dr. Michael Ryan, an Irishman working for the WHO, and various others, the WHO boss, of course, with his questionable past, to say the least, saying, we will go into your houses and take people. Well, the precedent has been set in all parts of England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, every English-speaking country, most European continental countries. Police will go in and take children, babies and small children, and even kicking and screaming teenagers who say, I am with the parent I want to be with. So what surprise should it be if they should come in and steal Granny? I'm afraid the precedent's been set, and as a codicil to this segment, I see that some of our viewers have already raised this particular video. A rather sinister one with a good turn in it is if you go to YouTube and look for the new and quite interesting channel called Cheeky F.E. Kerry, Kerry. She has put a video up overnight called Arrested for Being Sat on a Park Bench on My Own, filmed in a park in Richmond. I don't know whether it is actually Richmond Park, but certainly a green space in Richmond in West London. And she has two policemen hovering over her saying, you shouldn't be here. And she says, I'm taking my exercise, but it's in the form of meditation. And of course, they say, we're going to arrest you. They actually give her the closest contact with humans she has had during the day by cooping her up in a police van to drive her home with 4 policemen around her. But if people go to that video and go to 7 minutes in, they will hear her say, can I explain to you that we don't live under Napoleonic law in this country? We live under English common law, and that which is not forbidden is permitted. Again, we'll go into that more in extra time. We have things to say about the legal provisions of the 4 UK nations. But it's the same story every time. We respect and appreciate those officers of the law who have undertaken under their oath to uphold the Constitution and our customs, but from the Crown downwards there is a great deal of willful ignorance in breach of Magna Carta Article 39, which undertakes that none will be appointed officers of the law except those who are seriously intending to follow it.
Okay, well let's move on to the economic aspects of this, and of course we now know that there are something in the region of 1.5 million new claimants for universal credit in the last 3 weeks. This is really quite a staggering number. So just to put this in perspective, the workforce in the UK is 26.52 million, 4.61 million self-employed on top of that. So that's the situation. So what has the government done about it? Well, we know that they've made a lot of noise about the wonderful things that they're doing. Of course, the first thing they announced was £330 billion of loan guarantees, except that they have structured this in such a way that companies aren't getting the loans. So they're only guaranteeing 80% of any loan that any company takes out. And of course, the banks are saying, well, actually, you need to provide some personal surety for these loans for the other 20%. And this puts business owners in a very difficult position, and they're effectively not able to get the credit that they need to keep their businesses going. And then, of course, companies are allowed to claim employee wages, except that process probably won't start until the end of April, after which point, companies will have had to pay out a wage round already. And again, the government only providing 80% of the wages. So people are certainly taking a pay cut if the government manages to get this scheme off the ground in time to save any companies. Now, the estimation at the moment is that there will be 9 million jobs furloughed. And that means 9 million people not being productive over the next period of time. And these employee wage claims are supposed to cover their wages. As I say, that really depends on whether the government gets the payments out in a time which means that the companies involved don't go out of business before they get this money back from the government. Then, of course, they're also able to claim statutory sick pay. Delayed, of course. Tax and VAT will be deferred. It won't be wiped. It's not going to be forgiven. It'll only be deferred. And business rates relief, there is some of that. And there's some grants for self-employed people, but self-employed people aren't likely to see any money from that until June or July. And so those people somehow have to fill the gap between effectively the middle of March and June or July. And how that's supposed to happen is not clear. That undoubtedly is contributing to the numbers of people that are claiming universal credit. But in the meantime, we've got ferry services basically saying that without a bailout from the state, that perhaps transportation of food supplies would be affected because they won't be able to run their ferries. The airline industry saying the same thing. They're demanding bailouts. The government not very keen to provide bailouts for these types of companies. But of course, the one type of company that continues to get bailouts is the banks, because the Bank of England, £645 billion of quantitative easing going on. That money's going into banks. It's not going anywhere else. 0.1% interest rates, apparently. And of course, the Bank of England has announced that there won't be any stress tests. So all the regulatory requirements for the banks have been suspended this year. There'll be no stress tests. They're allowed to eat into their capital reserves. In fact, they're allowed to go to zero on their capital reserves of various kinds. So basically, everybody needs to worry except for the banks, it seems, at the moment, Brian. And it looks to me like the whole rescue package has been structured in such a way that really it's no rescue at all, because by the time it actually gets going, if it gets going at all, a lot of companies will already have gone out of business.
Yeah, so this is the banks hoovering up companies and businesses, and particularly the vulnerable ones, which are the sole traders and the very small companies. While you've been making that report, I've called up on screen the BBC's web page, the news web page for today. There is nothing of any substance about the devastation to Britain's economy and businesses. And this has been the pattern for the last few days, the last week really, the BBC not talking about the real impact on this country. And that can't be an accident, Mike. £4.3 billion worth of propaganda machine only wants to focus on coronavirus, and the only bit of economy on here, it's Tesco tells people to visit stores to get food because they can't supply via internet shopping. So what is the BBC up to? I think it's helping to drive the scare.
Now, of course, Boris in hospital for a second night in intensive care, so we wish him well. The question on everybody's minds is who is in charge, and of course it is supposedly Dominic Raab, who's the Foreign Secretary, also First Secretary of State, so he takes over the role. Alex, when did the job title of First Secretary of State appear?
Oh, there's been several waves of it in the past, but in the modern form, it's post-First World War, and it follows a continental tradition that there was such a thing as a minister without portfolio. The original sense of it actually is an early 18th century one, in which in those days there was no official term of prime minister. That was an insult, a minister who thinks he's more prime than the others. That's how the term began, as a taunt. And so in the early days, you had this idea of the first secretary to the Treasury, as the basically de facto title for the Prime Minister. So these two have been combined, the idea of the minister who enjoys the Crown's especial confidence, who can command a majority in the Commons, that's an 18th century idea, plus a 20th century idea of the minister without portfolio who does basically everything, who has every portfolio.
Do you find it as incredible as I do that somebody who's effectively in his first cabinet role ends up as interim Prime Minister?
Yes, frankly, because in any system which has decided to make parliamentarians the sole pool from which it draws the ministers, which was not the old common law persuasion and has not been in all common law jurisdictions, this modern British idea in the devolved parliaments as well, that only parliamentarians can be ministers, but that's what system we have. If you have that system, then the way that the Crown appoints ministers is you are going to lead the rest of my ministers because you can command a majority in the House. Well, by definition, that means you're thoroughly au fait with the House and its temperament and how to get a working majority. So a man on his first term is extremely unlikely to be able to do that.
No, absolutely.
Well, the only way he can, of course, is if things are written for him.
Right. Well, we may be coming on to that in a second. Now, the question is, if Dominic Raab is too inexperienced to be in charge, maybe the Army's in charge. Well, they have their COVID support force. Our armed forces are helping to deliver equipment and supplies to NHS trusts across the country. So the Ministry of Defence has said that more than 2,680 personnel are already deployed across the country, thousands more on standby, building hospitals, driving ambulances, assisting government departments, and purchasing ventilators is what they're all doing. They're also, the Joint Helicopter Command are at standby to provide air support to civil authorities. But yesterday, the illustrious General Sir Nick Carter was talking about this and the Army's involvement in COVID-19. He thinks that we will emerge a better society after coronavirus, so you should feel very reassured there, Brian.
I'm going to say live, I think this man is a prat. Okay,
very good. So anyway, that's what he had to say. But look, the question is, who is in charge? And the truth is that it is this man, Sir Mark Sedwill. Now, he didn't say, don't worry that Dominic has no experience, I will hold his hand. I know what he's thinking, but he didn't actually say it. But it turns out that even The Guardian has decided that they need to just explain what's going on with him. So here's The Guardian's headline here. Mark Sedwill, the securocrat steering Dominic Raab through the COVID-19 crisis. They're saying, but few would dispute that the influence of the Cabinet Secretary, Sir Mark Sedwill, has increased since Boris Johnson was admitted to St Thomas Hospital with coronavirus on Sunday night. Proof of his crucial role in Downing Street came in the drama on Monday night when it fell to Sedwill to inform a stunned Cabinet that the Prime Minister had been moved to an intensive care unit. Sedwill will now be the primary advisor to Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, who's deputising for Johnson as he confronts the world's biggest health crisis in a century. So let's come back to what Nick Carter was saying, because it is relevant here. He said, this is the military, we work straight through to the Prime Minister, but of course there's the National Security Council that's wrapped around him. So Nick Carter's saying that the Prime Minister is in charge, but the National Security Council is wrapped around the Prime Minister. I think that tells us a lot about what's going on. So let's just try to put this in a picture, asking who is in charge. Well, of course, we're saying it is in fact Mark Sedwill, because of course he is head of the National Security Council. He's also head of the Cabinet Office, and he's also head of the British Civil Service. So he in fact is wrapped around Dominic Raab at the moment as the interim Prime Minister. And Alex, I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but it is increasingly clear to us that the reins of power in this country are held in the hands of one person, and it's not the Queen.
No, it's the Cabinet Office that has appropriated more and more powers of the Crown to itself through this idea of a corporate Crown, which resides really at number 70 Whitehall. Now, a number of people we've collaborated with in the past have shed light on bits of this. Just to add to your excellent segment there, I would say that for years I didn't quite understand what was going on with this National Security Council. It came in just after I left GCHQ. And in fact, a retired, very former senior GCHQ officer told me he didn't understand what it was for. And it's overnight, there were twice as many people at that level than there ever had been thought necessary in the past. And with my old Kremlinological hat on, I used to think that the idea of wrapping around the Prime Minister was to actually prevent him from going straight and giving his orders or suggestions to the various parts of government. Now I see that that's perhaps at best only half the picture. And thanks for Thick Nick, it's usually the military men, sorry to say, and particularly the army men, who blow the gaff on these things by shooting their mouths off. What he's given away there with this wraparound idea is actually the dominant part of the model is stopping the Prime Minister from getting reports from reality. Right, his perception, this is a David Icke idea that I esteem, the perception deception. His behavior as Prime Minister and the Queen's will be shaped by what they perceive reality to be. So you actually are there not as a Soviet-style lightning conductor going outwards, but you're there as a National Security Council to stop honest people from the military, the intelligence and the frontline services from telling the Prime Minister directly what reality is.
Okay, that's thank you very much for that. Now let's move on to what else is going on, because Keir Starmer, of course, has been made the leader of the Labour Party, and his plan is to extend devolution. I would have thought, after what David Scott was reporting on Monday, that this particular plan can't have legs.
You would think that, Mike, but of course the history, for those who weren't in Britain or very old at the time, is that this idea of devolution as a term goes back to at least 1979, when Scotland and Wales decided in referenda not to have it. And it was, in those days, it was at the tail end of a Labour government that put it about, because it thought, well, we control the South Wales valleys and the industrial central belt of Scotland so much that we will have an inbuilt eternal majority if we have devolved parliaments there. Assemblies, as they were called. That then finally worked in the new Blair government the next time that Labour was in power. And now Sir Keir, the heir to Blair, the Fabian right-wing sort of centrist, radical centrist candidate who's taken over the Labour Party, has revived this yet another 20 years on, and has said, well, we want even more of this, failing to notice that in the case of SNP Scotland and the growth of Sinn Féin in Northern Ireland, Labour has not actually been able to do that. And even in Wales, which it runs as a kind of rotten borough, a kind of Little England for Labour, entirely in control of Labour. That's the one of the three cases where it has worked. Labour has managed to keep it as a complete fiefdom, and of course that has become particularly decrepit. Without making too much of a party political point, I would say, of course, that Common Purpose does particularly prefer to work through Labour models, particularly in the dirty post-industrial belt of the East Midlands and Yorkshire, but also in provincial cities like Plymouth. You've seen that. I'm certainly not excusing the Tories, because they believe in controlled chaos and deliberate chaos, but it's particularly this sort of radical centrist end of Labour and the Lib Dems that Common Purpose likes to swim in. And so Keir Starmer's basically saying, we're going to have a new constitution. He's actually used that phrase, and we're going to have a constitutional convention. Of course, the usual caveats apply: who will brief the citizens in that convention on their range of options. So it'll be a foregone conclusion. But he's telegraphed to us that Labour, yet again, being English in leadership now, have no understanding of modern Scotland, and are quite prepared to let it slip totally away, as indeed the modern Tories are, if they can only just keep the show on the road and keep governing parts of England just about.
Yes.
Can I just drop in there that at least some people are picking up, of course, on Keir Starmer, previously Crown Prosecution Service, and the man in post when, oh dear, there wasn't enough evidence to bring Jimmy Savile forward for trial. So I think a little bit of a grey background with that man.
And quite a number of similar cases as well. So yes, of course, he did get his knighthood for his work at the Crown Prosecution Service.
Of course.
So there you go. Anyway, look, we'll deal with this now. David on Monday was talking about this radio station sanctioned by Ofcom for what they described as a misleading coronavirus interview. Now, they say they're a programme on this radio station featured a guest whose views included claims that coronavirus outbreak was linked to the rollout of 5G technology. They also cast doubt over reporting symptoms of the virus, or reported symptoms of the virus. And David was making the point, well, actually, there are questions to be asked over 5G because, as was highlighted in The Lancet, this headline here, planetary electromagnetic pollution, it's time to assess its impact, and really showing the graph of how EMF radiation has increased over the last number of years. It needs to be looked at again. Now, Ofcom very clear that they were sanctioning that radio station for putting out what they perceive to be dangerous information about coronavirus. So I just wanted to contrast that with this because they released this today. This is Ofcom Broadcast and On-Demand Bulletin. Sorry, it was released on Monday afternoon. And this is a broadcast standards complaint assessment over, and his name escapes me. What's his name?
Piers Morgan.
Not Piers Morgan. What's his name, Alex? Our Good Morning Britain host.
That is Piers Morgan.
It is Piers Morgan. Okay, that is Piers Morgan. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So Piers Morgan apparently had been making fun of the Chinese by imitating the Chinese speech and Chinese accent, and as a result, this had a whole host of complaints. Now, the complaints have resulted in an outcome which is they're describing as not pursued, and the category they said generally accepted standards. But this was the key point here. Ofcom must take account of the broadcaster's right to freedom of expression and the audience's right to receive information and ideas without undue interference under Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights. These are fundamental rights which enable the expression of views that may be irritating, contentious, eccentric, heretical, unwelcome, or provocative. So, in the case of Piers Morgan, our rights must be upheld. In the case of somebody who's talking about 5G and coronavirus, no, that's not possible to uphold those rights. So, no matter what you think about those two issues, the fact is here that Ofcom inhabits a role to regulate the broadcast media. Ofcom also inhabits a role to regulate the telecoms industry. So I'm going to say there is a massive conflict of interest here because there's the possibility that Ofcom will act to protect the telecoms industry, possibly even a likelihood that that Ofcom will act to protect the telecoms industry and prevent scrutiny of the telecoms industry by the broadcast media. This can't stand, Brian, in my opinion. Ofcom, those two roles need to be split away from each other at the very least. Ofcom, if you look at their website, with respect to 5G, make it absolutely clear that they want to work with the industry to make the implementation of 5G as smooth as possible. How can they do that when they also have a role in regulating the broadcast media? This means that any concerns over 5G whatsoever can't be expressed on broadcast media, which is still probably the most widely the most widely disseminated media that there is. This is an untenable situation, surely.
Surely is, Mike. And what's in my mind immediately is that you have shown the hypocrisy in Ofcom there very clearly. What is needed, of course, is many thousands of people now to be writing, emailing, tweeting to Ofcom, asking questions about their duplicitous double standards in the reporting of information. We are still engaged with Ofcom because we're trying to get Ofcom to declare who was present in meetings, their meetings. They don't want to tell us. They're trying to use the Data Protection Act to cover that little one up. But we are doing the work of asking Ofcom these questions. We're doing it. We need people in our audience to write those letters and demand answers. And I think your work there deserves that. Now, where are we heading? And where are we headed unless we actually do something about what's going on? Well, sometimes it takes humour to really bring the thing home. This was sent through. I don't know where this image has come from, so all I can do is thank the unknown artist. But we've got police carrying off Julie Andrews from
Sound of Music.
Sound of Music. Thank you. I still haven't seen that film, Mike, I'm pleased to say, but I understand the gist of it. I've seen parts of it. And of course, the setting for The Sound of Music was against a Nazi ideology. So people are seeing what's coming, but of course, if we leave it until this vicious dictatorship has installed itself, then we're not going to be able to fight. And it was Solzhenitsyn who said in his work that if only we'd stopped it in the hallways of the flats and we dealt with it at the time, we wouldn't find ourselves in the camps. So we're using some pretty strong language today, but I think it's very clear there is a dictatorship installing itself in UK, and the roll-on effect of that is going to be massive on our lives if we allow it to happen. Quick 30 seconds, Alex, before we need to close.
Brian, you've put your finger on it. The dictatorship has now emerged in full view, but we cannot stop it at a grand scale. What we can do is stop it in our own homes. And Solzhenitsyn's absolutely right. Take it from me as one who lived in the former Soviet Union. They very much agree with Solzhenitsyn on his, he says the time came in the mid-30s when police knocked at the door and said, "You're coming with us." And that we would have had the numbers to say, "No, you're not. What law are you standing on?" Without even laying a finger on the officers of the law, just speaking to them in a confident, loud, non-screechy voice, waking the neighbours up, banging pots and pans. They ran away in the few cases when Soviets did that before the Great Terror had fully descended. And I'll leave the last point to a viewer in the chat box who has pointed out to us what this quarantine is going to do to us. He said that when we emerge from this quarantine, half of the nation are going to be amazing cooks, and the other half are going to have a drink problem.
All right, Alex, thank you for that. A bit of a right smile from us. I'll just say for anybody who didn't see the beginning of the UK column news today, we've put out an announcement that Ian Crane is very ill in hospital, and there will be further information about the Alternative View event, which was due to take place at the beginning of May, so stay posted for that over the next few days. And just to encourage viewers and listeners, wherever you are, UK, worldwide, it's time to act. And what you do now will make a huge difference to what comes in the future weeks and months. But serious times in UK. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.